This is the capstone event to a very intense and productive week, and so I want to make sure we have plenty of time to engage in this discussion. So first off, welcome everyone in the audience to the Quantum Summer School panel discussion on empowering innovation in quantum science and technology. My name is Travis Humble. I'm Deputy Director of the Quantum Science Center, and it's my pleasure to have you join us today for this conversation on the opportunities for innovation that are afforded by quantum science. The Quantum Summer School has been a first step for many scientists and engineers to learn about this new field and begin sharpening their skills. We're now set to ask, what more must be done to empower this next generation of innovators? And in today's panel, we'll explore that topic on quantum workforce development and how that continues beyond the Quantum Summer School. We have a panel of very highly accomplished scientists and engineers who represent a broad spectrum of perspectives on this issue. And from this, we'll learn not only their approach to workforce development, but also their expectations for how this workforce will impact the field of the future. So with that, I'd like to go around and call out individual panelists to give us some of their remarks on what are an opening question, which is, how do you define the quantum workforce? And how does that definition shape your expectations for the field? And for this point, Dana Anderson, CTO of Cold Quanta and also Professor of Physics at University of Colorado, perhaps I could call on you to get us started on this first question of how do you define quantum workforce?
Sure, absolutely. This is going to sound like I prepared for this, but actually I'm reflecting a view I've had for quite some years about the quantum workforce. First of all, I categorize it in three arenas. One is quantum engineers to solve quantum problems. A good example is, say, QKD, and you want to make a biphoton generator. And then there's quantum engineers that apply quantum to a classical problem. A nice example of that is inertial sensing. Inertial sensing is inertial forces are classical signals, and you want to detect them very well. And then finally, there are classical engineers to solve, did I mention this one? I don't think. Classical engineers to solve, I have to make sure I covered all three. Quantum engineers to solve quantum problems, quantum engineers to solve classical problems, and classical engineers to solve quantum problems, like very high precision pulse generators for carrying out logic with qubits of any type, whether they're atom-based, superconducting based, ion, or other. And I really see those as very different. What I see a lot of the universities focused on, including my own, is more or less the first category, quantum engineers for addressing quantum problems. Whereas in my company, we face a lot of the need for classical engineers for addressing quantum problems to be quantum familiar. And I think each of those categories needs to be emphasized. Cold Quanta as a company looks for all of them. As a professor at the university, I try to train my students to have very good classical skills to solve their quantum problems. I love that the workforce development is taking place across the US. But for those of you who are in academics, to try to encourage, particularly within engineering departments, making the classical folks familiar with my quantum problems. One other example, if I may, is incredibly high performance, low noise switching power supplies to make fieldable deployable systems that are low swap, low weight, very efficient, and so on. But quantum systems typically have a different set of problems than classical systems for those power supplies to address. That's just as an example.
Oh, no, thank you, Dana. Maybe I'll turn the question to Jason Alessia. Jason is a professor of theoretical physics at Caltech. Jason, I'm curious if you share the same ideas of quantum workforce or maybe have a different approach.
Well, I'm much more of a pie in the sky academic theorist compared to, I think, many people on this panel. But I have, had a productive relationship with industry, in particular through Microsoft and their efforts to pursue topological quantum computing. And, in that capacity, the aspect of the quantum workforce that I most directly interface with involve physicists that are able to, translate rather abstract theoretical ideas into experimental reality, so that people that are more practically minded than I am can actually try to build those devices in the laboratory based on some out there theoretical ideas.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Nick Braun, maybe I'll pick on you next. Nick's from research staff from IBM TJ Watson Research Center. I know you're down in the trenches working on some of those systems. How's your perspective of quantum workforce?
Well, actually, I don't really work in the trenches that much anymore, and I think this has affected the way I think about things. So it's been a couple of years since I've turned to TorqueWrench. I've been, much more involved in our kind of open source Qiskit community and IBM Q network with our hubs and the startups that we work with. So I think, everyone's biased from their own perspective. I studied condensed matter physics experiment. I saw, I had this, very, very narrow skill set, and I found quantum computing to be something where I could grow that skill set and become much more of a generalist, and pick up skills, pick up ideas from other parts of different fields, including engineering and other scientific disciplines. And so one of those skills that I always tell people when they ask me about the workforce development is coding. And I think the ability to code, it's not something that physicists necessarily learn when you pursue your PhD. I mean, you kind of maybe have to do it a little bit, but maybe not very well. But the ability to code opens up these whole worlds of like open source software, the ability to access quantum computers these days, the ability to explore quantum simulations with QTIP, for example. There's, open source. I believe Dana has a Bose-Einstein condensate online you can explore. There's just so much you can do now that wasn't, available 10 or even, 5 or even 10 years ago, that just the ability to code offers you access to. And so I think the more general kinds of skills you can pick up in all these different fields, the better, because you'll understand what makes it different, and especially the ability, the access of all kinds of new things that's given to you by these open source projects that are enabled by coding.
Oh, thanks, Nick. Something that I'm hearing in all the responses so far is this focus on skills, and especially skills that are coming out from different fields of study, things that we may not traditionally bundle together. Chris Monroe, professor of physics and electrical and computer engineering at Duke, and then also CEO of IonQ. I'm curious how that interdisciplinary nature is affecting your own vision of what quantum workforce is today.
Yeah, thanks. I'll pile on and join my colleagues here. Everything that I've heard so far, I mean, I won't repeat that. By the way, I'm not CEO. I was a temporary CEO a few years ago. Thankfully, we have a professional now doing that. I am chief scientist at IonQ, but my main hat is academic. It will remain that way. And I'll say I'm wearing my academic hat. I've really noticed over the last few years that even though I've been in physics all my life, Dana was on my thesis committee, I think, back in the early 90s. What I work with now is really left physics from a low level. That is, I was trained in atomic physics, and of course I think about it a lot. That's the basis for our ion trap systems, both at Duke and the University of Maryland, where I still have a presence, and the systems at IonQ. But we don't think that the physics is going to, we're not going to learn much more physics about ion traps. Okay, these are atoms. We know a lot about an individual atom, and it's the atomic ion is more perfectly isolated than anything we know of. Now, it doesn't mean it's perfect when we start to poke on it, and it's all about the engineering, the controller, the wrapper around the system. That's 100% of our work, both at the company and even at the university. We can eke out some physics every once in a while when we maybe see an atom with some different symmetries or different features. That's cool. But because of that, I'm at Duke. I'm both in the ECE department and physics, and I've been fond of getting academic engineers upset when I say real engineering never happens at a university. But I'll stand by that. I mean, we train engineers, but at universities, but real engineering, like using a device that that you don't need to know the inner workings of that device. That's what a computer has to be usable. And that's real engineering, and it rarely happens on a campus. So I'm existing for the last many years in this funny position. It's science, it's engineering, it's industry. To me, it's all a swirl. And your question about workforce, we're doing science for sure, but it's at a very high level, and it's the science of entanglement. And I'm concentrating mostly on quantum computing here, because quantum simulation is a subset. Quantum networks and quantum communication is a subset. You really need to do, they all should be treated together. I think quantum sensors is a little bit different, but any advance in that field will help everything in quantum computing. So, it's a happy marriage. And I think everybody else said it. It's a field that's much broader than physics, much broader than just science. It's like everything. Anybody that has an interesting problem they can't solve, they might not want to learn quantum physics, but it'd be nice to give them a device that they can play around with. And it's that kind of workforce we need. I think we want to rely less and less on physics PhDs in this field.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Professor Suzanne Yellen from Harvard Department of Physics. I guess I would ask for your perspective on this. Maybe not so much from the engineering aspect, but from that fundamental science and discovery of new materials. Your thoughts on that?
Thank you for not having to talk about engineering. So I also, fortunately, don't have to say all that much anymore. I would, in particular, kind of underline what Nick has said, the coding, and not just the coding itself, but the thinking about when is coding needed and how complicated does it have to be for a particular problem. And how do I get the resources to do that? So I would go at the problem from the kind of, I don't know whether at this level you call it abilities or skills or just willingness, is to question, to communicate, and to think. I think that is really, if they can do all three, they earn their PhD, they will get high paid and interesting jobs. So questions about what is the problem that I actually want to solve? What's the answer that I'm expecting? What's the type of answer that I want to get? Why do I go this way and not that way? And then, of course, they have to be able to think it through, right? So that is basically this old kind of physics are good problem solvers idea that comes in there. And finally, and I think that was something that I haven't heard yet enough from other people, is the ability to communicate. And in particular, as a theorist, and as a theorist in fundamental science, but somebody who works with companies, and we have now partnerships with various companies, IBM actually among them. And we have also a lot of collaboration with experimentalists. So the communication skills has to be not only within their own group, but also to people from very different disciplines. And I think that's really what makes the quantum world work, is that because this is all too complex. Not everybody knows everything. So they have to be able to not understand their quantum only, but also to communicate it to other people. They have to be able to translate the answers that they get back from the experimentalists into a well-working program. So it's really this kind of mental networking ability that I think is particularly high priced these days.
That's a great point, that there's definitely these different communities and skill sets that have their own languages and ways of communicating with each other. So being able to communicate across those barriers, so to speak, is certainly highly prized.
Travis, may I add something to
Suzanne's
Suzanne's comment? Yeah, so I completely agree with her perspective on communication, and I would like to add one more that's incredibly important. I think both because quantum in the end is, not to overuse the word, is multidisciplinary, but really what I mean, it's a matter of teamwork, and the ability to work in teams is an essential part of being successful, both in the company, in the collaborations that we have in our research and academics and with QSC, for example. And that is a skill that is typically not explicitly taught in academia. And so much needed. And what I usually find is the students get their PhD, they go into an industry and they think, well, this is my problem and I've got to solve it, and leave me alone until I'm done. I'll let you know when I'm done. And it's really an aspect, especially in quantum, because it is so broad, that ability to work in teams is a very essential part of education and training of our workforce.
So Dana, I think this raises an interesting point, which is that, is it asking too much for this quantum workforce of the future to be so versatile? You know, in some ways, we're using quantum workforce as a stopgap for all the workforce problems, and I'm wondering if what we really might need eventually is specialization, but we're not quite sure where that is yet. Asking someone to be able to do everything almost seems too demanding. I'm not sure if people have reactions to that. Daniel Bowring, I see your.
Yeah, I think it is not the case that one single researcher needs to do everything, although versatility is important in a multidisciplinary field. I think instead, what I need are lots of different kinds of people who all want to work on this weird project with me. I think that there is so on the demand side of workforce development, right? Like, so I'm in a position that sometimes I need to hire people, and where should I look, right? So I want the grad students and the postdocs in the audience to think about, like, put themselves in my shoes. I need to build an experiment that uses qubits, but I'm looking for dark matter. Okay, so where should I look? Should I go and should I hire at the conference where Google and IBM and Intel and these tech giants are also trying to hire people who have an experience with quantum computing? Can I compete with Google? No, I can't, right? I work at Fermilab, and while I can offer very livable salaries if you want to come and live in the middle of nowhere in Illinois, I cannot offer you the chance to make, I don't know, $100,000 right off the bat and work in Santa Barbara, California, and surf on your lunch break and whatever, right? So am I competing in that space? Well, no, I can't really, right? Should I go to APS and talk to dark matter people? Well, dark matter people often don't have experience with the hardware that I use, and so it's a real head scratcher. And in the end, I find that what I really need are people who really know themselves, right? If you have a background in condensed matter physics, if you have a background in cryogenic engineering, if you have a background in even in algorithms for quantum computing, I probably have a place for you in my group, but you need to, I need to know where to look for you, and you need to know enough about yourself to know that somebody like me is who you want to work with. And the only thing that distinguishes my answer from all these other people is that they spoke first and said their cool ideas before mine, right? So the thing about communication is also incredibly important. So, right, not to discount anything that anybody else says, but if I had to add anything, it would be that your knowledge of yourself and your confidence that you can take your skills and go and do this thing that no one else has ever done before. I think that's really important. And parting comment, I will point out that sort of self-confidence, that self-possession, is not equally distributed among all grad students, among all postdocs, right? We cultivate it in some people more than others, right? So I think it is a challenge for everyone, and it is more of a challenge for some.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. Sriras, Ramesh, Senior Manager at Accenture, I noticed that your talk was specifically on building a quantum workforce. I'm curious about your thoughts on this diversity issue.
I simply can't compete with the geniuses that have just gone by right after this, right? And I think this is a unique perspective in that I belong to a services company that makes sure that our clients are left with something that they can walk away with, that's something that's tangible. And so what I would say in my consultant-ish speak, not the risk of not sounding too much of a consultant, I would suggest that you understand what problems that you're solving for, because eventually the workforce, the quantum workforce, will involve your technical expertise. So everything that you've learned so far will be critical, it will be crucial in solving those intractable problems that these businesses are trying to solve for. We all know that math is everywhere, right? And you are right now studying that math, you're studying that technical knowledge, the coding that needs to get done. You can still graduate and you know, as a PhD or from a master's perspective, and still come into a company and say, hey, you know, I want to solve a problem. Let me help you identify this intractable problem. And so the scale of people kind of varies from those who know how to deliver the piece of work, those who have the industry expertise. Even as a PhD student, as a master's student, you will understand certain aspects of an industry while working in there, whether it is during the courses that you're going through presently or actually on the job training. I've hired a couple of PhDs and it's the same challenge, you know, and I echo this, the feeling around communication, being able to articulate this complex problem into something that can be distilled to something very specific that one of our clients, that a company is going to go back and say, if I apply these sets of algorithms at a certain components to my business, I will be able to solve the problem. We're not talking about having advantage from a business perspective and supremacy in that standpoint. I'm simply saying you can tackle a problem that is considered intractable. And for once these devices, your scientists, the people who are doing the optics side of things, or the superconducting or the material science side of things, builds the capabilities to make such things happen. We want to have a workforce who can be ready to actually implement it for our clients. So I fully get it. And by the way, even from a coding standpoint, Nick, you know, we talked about this, where you definitely have people who will understand the machine controls, the assembly languages, developing the programming languages for everybody else in the world who wants to use it can use it. You know, some of your own experimenting people that we have on the ground right now are tapping into these different devices using APIs and libraries. There's still skill required for that. And that's your, you know, the development skills, the developers associated to it. And so I guess I would kind of leave off at, from our standpoint, at least, we want to have people who can articulate the importance of some of these complex, intractable problems to people who can code them and integrate them into something that is of meaning and of value to our clients. And we're finding that these clients of ours, these businesses, want that now, want that today, right?
Oh, thank you, Sriras. Yeah, I'm starting to hear this answer, you know, become a little diversified. You know, it seemed to me you were talking a lot more, you know, emphasizing the communication in terms of providing that service and understanding the applications, and less about the engineering and the integration of those physics and materials aspects. So it does seem to me like this workforce we're talking about is starting to have, you know, different types of skills depending on the context. Stefan, I might ask you, what do you look for in terms of the quantum workforce, thinking about Microsoft and the Azure platform?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, continuing to echo a lot of the thoughts and explanations that have gone before, like Shreyas, I just feel grateful to be on a panel with so many experienced and knowledgeable folks. I think I might be one of those examples of someone who comes at the quantum workforce from not an area of expertise in quantum. You know, the last time I took any classes on quantum, you have to go all the way back to undergrad. But after 12 years at Microsoft, my experience is very much in systems development. And right now working on the compiler and runtime team that helps work with the folks building the Azure Quantum Service and the Q# language, we very much think about the idea of how can we provide the tools that not only satisfy the needs of researchers and experts in the field, but also allow people without expertise to make those inroads and really get the chance to experiment with and learn about quantum. You know, just like a physical tool, I feel like a good digital tool set, a good language is a force multiplier. And so I can take a little bit of quantum understanding that I have accrued as I've been learning more and more on this team, and have a much greater impact than my amount of knowledge would seem to indicate. And I think that at the same time, kind of connecting to this theme of communication, having a good set of tools and a good set of languages also helps facilitate that communication. When I sit down to try to peruse a quantum paper, I may not have the depth of math skills to understand the math that describes a particular quantum algorithm, but when that gets synthesized as a program, then I can apply some of my skills that I have as a developer and look at that and say, oh, I understand. It's performing this sequence of operations, and depending on this particular result, it's deciding to do these corrections, and that gives me a way that I can interact with that algorithm without necessarily having the full depth of training and expertise. And so I think that also meets an interesting need when we think about the quantum workforce, in terms of two different buckets that I kind of imagine that workforce in. Someone who is an expert in quantum and is approaching tools, a service, a particular hardware provider, they may be very concerned with the way that a particular problem is being solved. They want to learn something about the physics of those materials, or the specific way that that algorithm executes on that hardware. But someone who is an expert in another field, say a pharmaceutical researcher, might care a lot less about how that particular algorithm is run, but care a lot more about the answer that comes out. And so from that perspective, they're treating quantum as a whole as just a valuable tool, but that's essentially a black box where they're not concerned with the details of the insides. They just want to know, can this algorithm solve my problem? And I think that bridging that gap between the quantum experts who care a lot about the details and the more quantum curious, or the folks who are interested in using quantum just as another tool in their toolbox, I think is part of the challenge as we continue to grow this concept of a quantum workforce.
Oh, thank you, Stefan. That's I think a great insight. It actually ties back into a question Morris Yang has posted into our chat. And Vlad, I'm actually going to pose this question to you. I wanted to be sure to give you a chance to rest your voice after such an excellent presentation immediately before the panel. But Morris is asking, is there really a divide in preparation of the students, whether they're going to university or national labs or industry? And I think Stefan's response started to indicate that, well, maybe there is, depending on the function of that role. But I'm curious, from your perspective at Purdue, how do you see the different options available for the quantum?
Well, might decline this question. It's kind of, I'd like to say kind of more, to make more philosophical statement. It's not like I don't want or cannot answer that question, but I'd like to make more general statement that I think that this workforce development starts with creating culture in quantum. So, and in that regard, I want to compliment my good friend, Chris Monroe, who together with others actually helped to create this culture through big investment from the government. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because I remember very few years ago, actually, I consider the situation in this country disastrous, because I would go to ERC panels, I see how wonderful quantum centers are created there with billion euros invested there. And we had peanuts, small grants in NSF and so on. And I, as editor of Science, I saw these wonderful papers coming from China. I considered the situation really critically bad. I tried to change this. I talked to program manager, not much success. And when this group of excellent people, including Chris, actually knocked at the door of Congress, eventually we started big investment from Congress to this quantum. And that's where actually the culture starts. Now we're talking about quantum force development, which is the next and very natural step indeed. And yet another observation, I think when I speak of this quantum culture, I actually one of those who believes that brains go quantum, that and in that regard, we need to actually to kind of get used to think quantum. And the younger kids are actually, the easier for them to do so. Speaking of quantum force development, I think we should start it with pre-K. And in my opinion, these kids will take all this crazy EPR entanglement business very easily, naturally, because that's the way the brain works. And then the older we are, the more experience with classical world we have. Sometimes it's actually harder to comprehend some of most challenging notions and ideas of quantum. So I think that I basically trying to generalize that workforce development starts with creating culture, and when culture starts with funding, investment, and in that regard, situation changes really dramatically, and it's good. But speaking of culture, maybe we should think of basically, I mean, developing toys, games based on EPR business. I mean, I think it would be very natural. So what I'm suggesting, of course, it's important to train students, postdocs. Of course, it's important this synergy between industry and academia, this science and engineering. It's all true. I agree with everything what's said above. What I'm saying now, I think we should think of developing quantum culture in more general meaning. So that's what comments I'd like to make.
Oh, thank you, Vlad. No, I think this concept of quantum culture is an interesting one. I'm wondering if people have a reaction to this. In particular, what's driving that culture? You know, certainly the promises that we've all heard from quantum computing, and certainly expect them to be borne out in the future. But is there a difference between the near-term culture and the long-term culture in our field? Let's see. Daniel, thank you for volunteering to answer that one.
Well, it's not the kind of answer that I think dovetails nicely. So Vlad's points were very, very good. But in terms of long-term versus near-term culture, I just want to observe that if you look around at who is getting grants to do quantum information research, it's a lot of men. It's a lot of men from well-represented groups in physics already. And so this was surprising to me when I started looking around and trying to understand this. I think it's because in some sense it's a new field, but the people who have the free energy to jump into it are the people with a lot of privilege in the field already, who have some funding and some job security, and they could just decide they want to do something and do it, right? I think one of the things that we need to think about when we build a quantum culture is how to be maximally inclusive and to be sure that going forward, because again, we have a new field, a new-ish field, how can we reflect the sensibilities of the 21st century instead of the history of the 20th century?
Oh, thanks, Daniel.
So,
Dan,
so my comment about culture is first to look back in history at two other things that some of us are old enough to have witnessed, but all of us are old enough to have studied. And that is the invention of the transistor. And you might say that led to a cultural change, the invention of the laser, that led to a cultural change of the type that I think that you are talking about, Vladimir. And then jump forward 20 years in any of those, and then jump forward in 20. My statement is quantum will be in the kitchen. You know, quantum there'll be something on the scale of a toaster, roughly, in the kitchen that will be quantum, and it won't be second thought any more than the number of gigabytes my iPhone now has. Anybody going into Best Buy says, I want a 256 gigabyte iPhone, and that was pretty exotic to talk about gigabytes, megabytes, or any bytes in the 90s and so on. So the culture you're talking about, Vladimir, leads eventually to quantum in the kitchen and the toaster. And I think you're right that it's ultimately going to be, you know, for kids, it'll be a lot easier. Right now, quantum is exotic and cool and, you know, hard. And that's why we're talking about workforce development. And to your point, Daniel, there's still a lot of barriers for people to enter into quantum. not just gender barriers, but intellectual. It's hard. It's hard and it's expensive. So I think that one of the things that the reason CoQuanta put up and will advance what we call Albert and is the BEC machine, and as soon as it's going to be sensors, is because we watched how quantum computing was causing a cultural shift. So getting access to a quantum computer is not exotic anymore. And thinking about coding, there's still a barrier to entry, but it's a whole lot lower thanks to IBM and Google and Rigetti and so on, and now Microsoft, et cetera, than it used to be. And the same thing has to happen, I think, more broadly with quantum. And I think it's appropriate now that we have a big focus because it's better, unlike the transistor, unlike the laser, I think it needs much more of a catalyst than it did in those old days because it's so hard, so expensive, and a catalyst with a focus on culture. Thank you, Vladimir, and also Daniel for making your statements about culture and diversity and the barriers to entry.
Stefan, what are your thoughts about quantum in the kitchen?
Yeah,
I like that phrase. So
I like that phrase as well. I do think that there's an interesting tension when new technology is developed between keeping it specialized and sort of existing in a walled garden versus commoditizing it. And I think that for quantum to succeed, we really do need to be thinking early on about what it means to commoditize quantum, like what Dana was talking about. You know, I frequently hear people draw the analogy between quantum and HPC, high performance computing. But I appreciate your point, Dana, because in many ways, the iPhones or the laptops that we're talking to each other on right now are high performance computers. When you think about, you know, where computing was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, especially 20 years ago. And so imagining that future for quantum, you know, I am not at all a materials expert, so I can't say what kind of developments there it might take, but even in the kind of medium long term, if you will, utilizing the things that we've learned about making computing power available to the masses via things like services, via interconnected computers and the internet. I think that those are ways that we can begin that commoditization process earlier. And rather than viewing that from a position of fear, of thinking, okay, here's the specialized area of mine that now is so broad and so generalized that people don't think it's special anymore, I think that that would actually be a win, because it means that it has gotten to the point where it is so fundamental to the way that we approach our the way that we live our lives and the way that we solve technical problems, that it doesn't need to be highly specialized anymore. And I think that that would be a good goal to strive for.
So how does this change, you know, the audience for the summer school, you know, looking to get involved in quantum, they hear, you know, expectations of 20 years from now, you know, the broad availability of quantum technology. How should that change how we are training them today? I mean, I think this for me goes back to, are we focused on near-term needs, maybe the engineering concerns, Chris, that you were raising, or should we be thinking about the long-term applications that come from when these systems are finally built? Chris, do you want to take
Travis, I just want to quickly comment on, so one quick thing that I want to comment on when you're talking about the barrier to entry being expensive. Is it that the barrier to entry is expensive to build a new system, or is it a barrier to entry to learn about quantum? Is it a barrier to entry to access these devices? I think the answer is going to vary based on what we're talking about. You know, from a building the device standpoint, I'm no expert. I will leave it to everybody else over here on the call to comment on that. As far as learning about quantum, Purdue offers a lot of these trainings, MOOCs available online. If you simply Google up the different ways in which you can learn about improving yourself, you're going to want to do something. You're going to want to learn, and not just quantum, but any other technologies that's out there. You're going to want to do it, and so the initiative comes from within. And I think the fact that everybody's here on this call today is the first step in that, and the path to learn it it's sure you need to have certain understandings, but what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to build one? Again, going back to the first one, or are you trying to apply it to a business? If it's on the latter side of things, the conversations are going to be very typical to how we used to interact when AI was talked about. I hate to use AI to cover everything. That's just not me. But that's how the business and everybody else sees it. And if you're talking about access to the technologies that are presently available, companies like Microsoft, AWS, IBM, Rigetti, Honeywell, and IonQ, and every single one of these different partners are giving people access. So, IonQ, Honeywell, via Azure Quantum Services, it's just so easy to tap into that. I've logged online very quickly, click, 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 next button, and I have access. They have Jupyter notebooks available for you to kind of experiment. And from that point onwards, based on what you already know, you reuse the pre-existing assets that you have. It's very democratized in that manner. And IBM has done an amazing job at it with the open source of Qiskit. And the whole environment that they welcome everybody to kind of explore and experiment is awesome. Everybody's doing it. And just to kind of give you a perspective, back in the day, if I were to tap into any one of those different devices, I'm going to have to pay a huge lump sum for an obscene amounts of time for an obscene amount of dollars. Right now, if I were to simply, don't quote me on this one, but if I were to cost what the entry is to use something or to run a quick task, it's 50 cents or $1.50 per query. Sure, you have multiple hits, it's a multiplier factor over there. But from a learning standpoint and an accessing the technology standpoint, it's out there. And I would encourage everybody to tap into these wonderful companies like IBM and Microsoft and AWS and start exploring, start experimenting.
Suzanne, I wanted to acknowledge, I think I saw your hand come up after this.
It perhaps does not tie in immediately to what Shreyas just said, but it does a little bit. I would like to start my statement by being a little bit contrarian. Namely, there is quite a bit of quantum technology and excitement, etc., out there, and not that many useful tasks that we can solve with it yet, especially if we talk about quantum computing. And I have, in my mind, no doubts that we will have them. But I think the way to get there is not only by now thinking 20 years ahead, but really using your own curiosity and trying out what you can do now and what you can think about now and what you can go on, develop further now. And probably the $1.50 access that Shreyas has just mentioned is one good way to that. And I think the way how we educate our students, or hopefully educate our students, is another one.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. Daniel, I think you withdrew your hand. Is that right?
Yeah, it got covered by the other panelists, so I need to put in my 2 cents. Plus one.
Dana, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to follow what Shreyas said. I think you proved actually a very interesting point that I've seen the transition. We have not done a very good job in quantum culture because when you said quantum, every time you said it, you meant quantum computing. Every company you mentioned is a quantum computing company. Every learning opportunity you talk and barrier entry had to do with quantum computing. I see quantum computing as being a very important part of quantum, but it's just a corner of a high dimensional space. And I would ask you, how many areas of quantum have you took the time to learn? And I'm guessing, quantum computing is great, but there are a whole lot of other things out there which from a business point of view are incredibly valuable. But it goes back to my original point. There's a very high barrier to entry. And I see that one of the objectives, one of the reasons I like so much the DOE centers, at least QSC, which I know the best, is that there's an opportunity to lower that barrier in other areas of quantum as well as computing. It is a large barrier. And I know this because there's also companies like Northrop and Lockheed and Boeing, which have been looking over their shoulder at quantum for years. But because it's so expensive to invest in, because they're not for quantum computing, but for other things, and they're not sure it's going to give them anything, and they'd have to hire a bunch of PhDs, they haven't done it. So I think it's still our responsibility to lower the barriers. So in the next summer school, you come back and you tell us how low the barrier is in 1- quantum computing.
You know, we've actually received a question through the YouTube stream, this one coming from a high school perspective, a student who is asking, you know, how can we incentivize studying quantum computing, you know, taking on these barriers and trying to get over them, even so early on as high school, so that they pursue it in college and further. Daniel, I'm not sure if you were going to respond to that particular point, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, can I see the actual question, or do I have to listen to you carefully?
Oh, I'm sorry, you'd have to listen to me carefully. But the specific question, Dana, was, you know, could we consider pushing quantum science down either in some form of standards or curriculum to incentivize students to follow it into college, as opposed to getting into college and discovering it?
Oh, I think absolutely, and I think that's coming. You know, there are books now, and I'm not sure what programs, you know, for example, IBM has for that, but I am sure it's coming. You know, what every company recognizes is that generation, the high school generation, is going to be grown up when quantum is in the kitchen. They're going to be the ones that live during that transition, and they are our customers, the collective customers today, our workforce tomorrow. And I'm sure that is going to happen. And I'm happy to have that high school student, if they're high school, whatever, wherever you are, write me.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that actually it'll be interesting to hear from all of the audience, both on YouTube and through the summer school, you know, their perspectives on these barriers that we're talking about. You know, Vlad framed this in terms of our quantum culture, and you know, Shreyas talked about how we can, you know, see some lowering of these adoption barriers. But like Dana pointed out, there are certain biases and blind spots. So it'd be great to hear this from the audience as well. Please type your questions into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them as time permits. Sasha, I see that your hand's up. For those who don't know, Sasha Voltaseva, professor from Purdue and also the Workforce Development Lead for the Quantum Science Center.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis. Well, I promise to keep silent because I'm really enjoying your fantastic, insightful comments. But as the workforce lead for the Quantum Science Center, I am also involved in overall coordination of quantum workforce development. And thankfully, we are pushing in this direction. So we are getting together with workforce leads from other DOE centers and with other quantum centers, including NSF, to make sure that we are aligning these activities and that we cover all the aspects that you actually are talking about. So let's say there is, well, we can say that there's somewhat division between.
Oops. Sasha.
Sorry, sorry, I was muted. So NSF centers, we can say, will be mostly focusing on curriculum developments. We need quantum engineering programs. They will also be, let's say, responsible for K-12 education. And I just wanted to comment on that because indeed, this is very, very important. And it takes not only just to build a new quantum culture, that also will take a changing like overall perception of quantum. We have to demystify it. With all the lay audience and mass media that we have around us, every time they say quantum, it's always, you know, this mysterious, this spooky action. And, you know, it's exciting, but it only excites ambitious and curious kids. People on the shy side, including a lot of female students, are turning away from quantum because they might feel that, well, it's too mysterious, it's too tricky, it's too hard. So just to changing the perception of quantum at all levels of this society would be very important. We have to stop saying that no one understands quantum. It's totally mysterious, and there is no way we can actually ever fully understand it. We have to flip it, and we have to say that, as Dana said, it will be part of our everyday lives in the very near future. It's not only about quantum algorithms that you might not understand. It's about tiny quantum sensors that will be everywhere. That's about communication systems. You know, we all have fiber systems, optical fibers going and bringing internet to our homes. We will just have quantum communication systems instead. So we have to make it a new normal with quantum, so that people are very comfortable. I know that talking about quantum as a mysterious and spooky thing really generates a lot of attention, but I don't think it's the right way to go forward if we really want to make it part of our lives, and we want our kids and students be comfortable and creative about that.
Oh, thank you, Sasha. I think that's an excellent point. Quantum culture can't be based on the difficulty of learning quantum mechanics. I think that that's a great insight. I am curious, though, then for the panel, for these students who are starting off in this area, what is the first priority if they wanted to work with you? What is that skill that they need to have in order to be able to contribute and help you innovate? It's certainly going to vary from person to person, but I think it'd be useful to just get a collection of what your thoughts are. Nick, maybe I'll pick on you, especially from the perspective of programming and Qiskit. What is it you're looking for?
Well, I think, I found myself as gone from an experimentalist in the lab to an experimentalist with code. So I will, download software packages and start just kind of hacking away and exploring problems in that way. But when people ask me like how do they want to get in the field, I generally tell them that, I think one of the things I love about working in the quantum information sciences is that the field is so vast and so broad that there's probably something in there that you can feel passionate about. So I guess in general, I tell people to follow what their interests are and then figure out how they can plug that into the quantum information sciences field.
Oh, thanks. Jason, how about for yourself? Do you feel like that you find the people you're looking for from the traditional backgrounds in physics and condensed matter, or is there something unique that you're looking for?
I would echo a word that was just said, namely passion. I think passion is the most important thing that I found differentiates somebody that is really successful as opposed to just as okay. So I would far prefer a really passionate, dedicated student that had, let's say, very little background in the research rather than somebody that was not super enthusiastic, but maybe had a lot of prior coursework. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with this. Vlad, I see your hand up.
Well, I think it's my approach. So in that regard, I'm kind of technology driven. I love physics, but I think among many exciting scientific problems, it always makes sense to choose those which really make a difference. For me, when I pick up students, I want those who want to change the world, those who want their thesis to go to textbooks. And now, clearly, the technology evolution going on now is quantum. Therefore, I want my students to contribute to something which gonna really change the world. And one more thing I'd like to mention, which we didn't discuss, actually, I believe there are like two technology evolution now coexistence, AI and quantum. And I think merging the two could create lots of synergy. So, and I see lots of opportunities there. Actually, in my ads for hiring new students, I write it explicitly. I want students who are very much interested in both AI and quantum.
Well, I think this is very interesting because nobody's saying that they need someone who's an expert in quantum mechanics, and I think maybe that's naively what I might have anticipated, and certainly what students might anticipate. Is that because we just assume that they already are experts, or is that something that you think we're at the point where you can pick up along the way? Dana, I think you had your hand up before this, so I
Actually,
won't call
did,
you out.
and it's an excellent question because, you know, I'm going to speak because wearing my academic hat, I resonate with all I've heard about passion and so on. Reflecting Sasha's statement, if I can, and speak for CoQuanta, my favorite hire was a cake maker. And in the spirit of Quantum in the Kitchen, on the employment side of that, it's until you have people, as I was interviewed once, it was another term, until you have truck drivers doing it, it's hard to imagine. Until you're hiring truck drivers and hiring the cake makers, you're not done with the technology. And so wearing that hat, we really have a very different purpose and a very different drive towards making quantum every day. And this cake maker, by the way, is a fantastic hire. She doesn't know quantum worth kazoo. She couldn't solve Schrodinger equation, but she does a fantastic assembly of quantum systems like nobody else on Earth can, because she has passion. She has an incredible artistic and aesthetic sense, which you would see too if you looked up her cakes on the internet. And as I said, that is the kind of person ultimately we want responsible for making, building quantum systems and commercializing them. So I agree with everything all of you said for where most of quantum is. And indeed, wearing another hat, I wanted somebody who can solve Schrodinger's equation really well. But there's another aspect which is really key towards this cultural change and shift, but it's an industrial component.
Stefan, your comments.
Kind of echoing that, I do think, as everyone has said, passion is important. A willingness to learn is critical. It does still feel like in some ways we're making a lot of statements that are broadly true, but we're trying to apply to two slightly different categories where there's quantum workforce in the sense of the people who are building new quantum systems and making sure that we're doing the work necessary today to lower the barrier to entry so that there is more variety and more opportunity for people to get involved in the development of new quantum systems, quantum techniques, or quantum computing software. But then there's also the effort of demystifying quantum enough such that people feel comfortable using it as a customer of quantum computing. I would say, you know, if someone is interested in using quantum to solve a problem, then they might just need to know enough to figure out how to express their domain-specific problem in whatever the lingua franca is of quantum computing or of quantum algorithms, but they may not need to know about the material science. That doesn't mean that no one should need to know about the material science, because we want to bring up that next generation of people that are going to continue to revolutionize that area and work on the industrial side and the hardware side. But I think that they are kind of two different groups. And again, that circles back to this idea of communication of, okay, now that we have these groups, now that if you find people who are passionate and occupying those two categories, how do you make sure you connect them well enough that they can collaborate on solving those interesting problems?
I think this is an interesting perspective because, you know, earlier we were talking about that there is probably a spectrum of people, workers, you know, that address different areas. If you think about the existing conventional computing technology, you know, there's website developers and people who make the hardware that the websites run on, and they don't necessarily have the same background. I'm not sure that we're quite as sophisticated yet, you know, that the quantum workforce banner at the moment seems to be all encompassing. But it sounds like that's the type of thing that may evolve over time. Chris, I'm especially interested in what you think these near-term motivations should be. We've talked about how the people need to be passionate. What is it that they should be passionate about in terms of, you know?
I always tell my students, you know, if they're in it for the long haul for a PhD, you know, that's many years, 5 or 6 years. And many of them, and I felt this way when I was a student, I didn't like the fact that I was learning more and more about less and less. I felt like, you know, at that age, you want to sample the world and so forth. But I had this experience, and many of my students do as well. And I tell them this, that by focusing on one task, becoming the lab expert on some arcane task that everybody relies on, it's sort of amazing. You can't predict this, but many students, they end up sort of being able to translate that to other very narrow tasks. They can't you learn what it takes, like the cake maker, right? I mean, this woman made cakes. She could probably, frit a quart cell like nobody's business. And that's another way to say passion is important, because we know that when you know everything about nothing, turns out you do know it's much more than that. This is not unique to quantum, of course. But what we're learning about quantum, of course, is that it's hard. That makes it a system, like building an airliner. You know, you get this concept of systems engineering. It's not just the sum of the individual parts. You have to, tolerance them all, and in ways, they're sort of breathing lives in a certain sense. And so, that's also true of many complex systems. So none of this is native to quantum. I think one issue in workforce, I mean, we're talking about workforce, and I don't want to poo-poo the idea of quantum workforce, but to me, it's a chicken and the egg problem. I mean, the workforce and the barrier, they're just going to disappear as soon as they're in the kitchen, or as soon as we know that we have this app that everybody needs. Then there won't be panels about quantum workforce. Just like right now, there are not panels about workforce for building silicon VLSI. There is a workforce for that. There's a huge demand. So Suzanne mentioned this as well. That's the chicken and the egg problem. We don't have that killer app right now. But what I love about quantum computing is that if we find a killer app in any one area, I'm almost sure that it's going to multiply into 100 different areas after that. Okay, maybe it's a little bit of faith. So sorry, Dana, I have to pick on you. I have to say that the one thing that sways me in quantum computing is that it's not incremental, not at all. Now, it's not to say everything else in quantum is incremental, but quantum sensing below the shot noise, okay, 20 dB below. It's using similar technology than what we had before. It's just not. It's not this monster leap that quantum computing is. Now, with such a big promise like that comes huge risks that are probably commensurate with the promise. And so I think probably why we're here is because why the NSF and DOE are endowed with these centers is because of quantum computing. It's because they realize that this could change everything. Now, quantum sensing existed 30 years ago, 50 years ago, and it will continue. And as we get better instruments, it's going to be amazing. We're going to need people that design those instruments to understand their quantum limits and engineer around them. But sorry, I don't find it as exciting.
Hey, Chris, I think you make an excellent point about this idea of the risk. Both in terms of the faith that we all have that we're going to solve these hard problems, that realize these potential applications, but then also as people who are investing their careers and their time in this, there's lots of opportunity cost, right? We could all be machine learning, AI. Vlad is advocating for that as well. And I guess I'm wondering, what is it that these students, early career professionals, need to be monitoring in terms of this risk, and how do they prepare for what could be a turbulent time, for quantum computing and its development, both in terms of the pace of innovation, just imagine where we were 5 years ago versus 5 years from now, but then also those error bars. But Dana, I see you raised your hand.
Well, no, I think what you're saying was great. And actually, Chris, I'm honored if you point your arrow in my direction. I'm delighted. Let me respond to that by saying, at the beginning of the internet, which I think DOE was also very involved with, nobody imagined that some of the world's most powerful companies would come out of that never existed before. And you might have said that, you could have said it's incremental, the internet. I mean, high energy physicists wanted to pass data around and send bitnet messages to each other. But the incremental part is the only thing that you and I see about sensing at the moment. But the degree of innovation that may arise because of quantum, indeed quantum computing, but also the other parts of quantum, is really, really hard to predict, except to say it's got to happen. because that's how life-changing, that's how technology-changing quantum is as a whole. It's entanglement, it's quantum 2.0. And yeah, my imagination is about like yours, and I'm doing sensing, in an incremental sense, but I don't think it'll stay that way. And I think the world will change in a way that's hard for us to exactly predict.
Stefan, I saw in the chat that you raised a point in particular around this idea of not getting locked into particular paths of development, especially for programming. You had talked earlier about the quantum intermediate representation. Maybe you want to elaborate on what's motivating that.
Yeah, gladly. I think as someone who comes at this from the software side, I'm very passionate about the idea of engaging with and broadening that ecosystem. And as we've been looking at how to solve those problems, one of the things that we've been developing is this quantum intermediate representation. If you search for QIR or quantum intermediate representation, you should be able to find some good links online and some presentations that myself and others have given on the topic. And the goal here, specifically with QIR, is not to create any kind of lock into a particular ecosystem, but rather to present a starting place for ideas so that people who are approaching quantum from the software side can engage with and refine this specification to really build this common representation. I keep coming back to this theme, but I really like it that Suzanne brought up about communication. This is what would be necessary to allow communication between our systems. If someone is in school and they primarily learn Qiskit and they want to continue developing in Qiskit, but they might want to branch out and start using some systems where perhaps that is not the default input, it would be great to have a common intermediate representation that they could then use to make their code portable in that way. And by the same token, we're working hard on getting full support for the Q# programming language on QIR. And this is something that we really want to be a community-driven solution so that people who are software developers, people who are quantum researchers, people who are high schoolers who are curious about the field can look at that and begin contributing to it as a way to provide these kind of force multiplier tools and bringing access across a number of different front end and back end solutions.
Excellent. Nick, saw your hand up.
Let me unmute myself. So I think Stefan makes a very good point, but one of the things that I know we consider is that, when we're in the noisy quantum hardware era as we are right now, the kind of tools that we use are going to be different from the tools we use in 5 years when we have more error correction or more error mitigation, and that's going to look different as we proceed towards error correction. So I think we have a vision that it's good to have a unified and portable language, like Stefan said, and we have our own we call OpenQASM 3, which we helped develop with AWS. And that specification is online, and you can look up OpenQASM 3. And we released a paper on the archive explaining its philosophy a couple weeks ago. But we also know that this is kind of we have error correction kind of with this in mind, like achieving error correction. But I don't think this language really addresses what do you do once you have an error corrected computer. And we know we're going to have to come and revisit this. And at least as Stefan's doing this out in the open, we're doing this out in the open. So I suppose that as long as everyone's doing it out in the open, we can figure out a way to collaborate in the future. So that's what I look forward to.
Well, actually, I think that openness, transparency point is something that is very important right now, because certainly there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, and some of that should probably be proprietary. I think that's where a lot of companies derive their value. But from the student and entry point into quantum, how much of that is a barrier? If we get into a situation where the technology itself needs to be protected, is that something that's going to slow us down in the future, or is the trade-off that it helps speed things up?
Is that a question for me, Travis?
If you'd like to take it, that'd be great. It seemed a little bit of a hot topic, so I wasn't sure.
No. I suppose in my view, and I do have, you know, filed a number of patents and the like, I feel like the level of the intellectual property is happening is so far deep in the weeds that you're not going to be like approaching this even if you have the best university fab, you know, in the country or world or whatever. I think it's really kind of down in the details that aren't necessarily important, but maybe rely on more specialized techniques that pertain to certain things that are not, you know, that are only relevant to really specialists in the field. I would say. This is my perspective, at least.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks, Nick. Sriras, I'm curious how much of this idea of proprietary solutions versus, you know, open, transparent community efforts plays in for you.
It's a tricky one. I think it's a quick, so we're a services-based company, which means that we try to deliver value to our clients, business value to whatever degree. It's not saying it's quantum computations will solve this several business problems. So we work for our clients. Many instances we come with these patents, and like Nick and like everybody else over here, I mean, I do too have several integration patents that we filed and we received as a consequence. Can we apply those? The answers are sure. Yes, we can. Our clients love it. They appreciate that we're coming with that generally people can come with pre-existing IP. You know, when you think about it, when Travis, when you're going out and you're applying for a lot of these the grants and so forth, your PIs or everybody else that you're pushing forward with comes in with a lot of this IP. So I don't see that specifically as a barrier, but rather a pathway to open up something that can be delivered upon. We're all in it to get something at the end of it. We're all companies in many instances, many components of it. So we want to make sure that whatever it is that we're doing has value to whatever is being asked to be performed, right? It's what you make of it. So I don't particularly think. So for instance, I use both, my team, I would say, also uses both IBM and Microsoft technologies and AWS technologies. They have a lot of IP, a lot of this open source stuff that was already talked about. I have projects that are leveraging, Chasm tech, OpenChasm components, and Qiskit and stuff provides it. I'm also very familiar with QIR as well, and in Stefan's presentations. And we're leveraging certain components of Azure Quantum and its various different quick to push button, quick to kind of raise up some of those pre-existing assets, the democratization of quantum computing, not quantum. Sorry, Dan, I don't want to interrupt that, because quantum is vast. But my mindset is very much similar to what Stefan is talking about, which is, sure, I have a lot of these different things that are available. It's ammo. It's ammo in my arsenal of things that I can go about and say, dear client, there's so much stuff that these different companies are bringing. Let's try to do and deliver something of value. And my, the thought that I would impart on everybody who are listening, the students, high school students or otherwise, you have these tools, quantum computing, like quantum as a whole, and you can apply it. And businesses out there are looking for it. There's a lot of people who are adopting it. And to some earlier points that were made on the different use cases, I think Suzanne, there's hundreds of different use cases that you can apply to each sector that I can select from, various different financial sectors that are out there right now. 13 according to S&P 500, but I can nitpick in every single one of them and talk about how quantum is relevant. Quantum computing is relevant to them. Quantum sensing also, to a certain regard, how I can apply in the future. We don't have that yet. The stuff that you can do with it is just phenomenal. But yeah, I think there are applications that are out there, and these tools provide you the means to do it. And there's no IP protection. Sure, the individual tools themselves will have it, but I'm a user of those tools, and there's a value associated to being the user of those tools. You got to pay money to IBM to use some of the stuff. You got
yeah.
Azure.
I think you make an excellent point that, it's not a, both paths here are supporting this. The open, transparent research is, of course, an important piece of this ecosystem, but also, how we are incentivizing, innovation, right? And some of that is through proprietary and building value behind those types of quantum solutions. So yeah, I think this is something that our students definitely need to understand, is that, there's not one single culture, right? We're not a monoculture, right? There's a diversity within quantum that is motivating all of these types of developments. Well, look, this has been a very exciting discussion on the role of quantum workforce and the potential for the quantum summer school to help empower that next generation of innovation. I'd like to move into closing remarks. We've only got about 13 minutes or so left. If each person could just take a few minutes, summarize what you'd like to say, but in particular, I'm certainly interested in understanding what empowers you, where you derive your passion from going forward. As insights for our students on how people who are leading the field today are actually, living this message that we're giving them. Suzanne, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you if you have some closing remarks you'd like to make.
Okay, so I would like to start by saying, I'm fully with Vlad. I want to create something, and I want my students to create something and to want to create something that is new, that does not exist yet. So I really want to kind of take ideas out of nothing and make something out of it. And everybody who has the willingness and the open mind and the curiosity, please come, and you will learn quantum just fine.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne. Jason, how about you next?
So I work on what I would call a dark horse approach to quantum computing, which is the topological quantum computing approach. And one thing that I find generates a lot of passion in me is the idea that every stage of the journey towards this very lofty goal of making these intrinsically fault-tolerant quantum computing devices is paved with just, I think, great opportunity for basic science discovery. And it's not just the end goal that's cool, it's the journey itself. Kind of combines everything that made me want to do condensed matter physics in the first place. Maybe I can take this opportunity to address one question you asked earlier, Travis, about risk. Again, I work on what I would consider an extremely risky approach to quantum computing, but the people that have come through my group and study aspects of the problem with me, they learn skills that translate broadly. So I have students that work at Intel now, a postdoc that worked for PsiQuantum and now works at IBM. More naturally, I've had students and postdocs go to Microsoft, continuing topological quantum computing. But I think it's really important to observe that skills that one might learn in one particular approach to the problem can be a bridge to doing various other things in the quantum era.
Oh, great point, Jason. Oh, thank you. Stefan, maybe I can transition over to you for closing remarks.
Yeah, for sure. It's been great to be able to participate in this and hear from the other panelists. I feel like I know I've definitely learned and gotten a lot from it. So thank you, everyone here. And just, I guess, kind of continuing Jason's point about risk, I do think that something that really brings great innovation is not being too risk averse. There's just as much value in figuring out why something doesn't work as there is in just picking ahead of time the thing that will work. And so applying that for the students, anyone out there, I would encourage you, be willing to experiment, take that curiosity and put it into action. If you have a background in quantum, but you don't know much about software or materials, try to apply that. Look for places where you can explore those areas. If you are someone who, like me, is a software developer who is curious about quantum, go download some tools and give them a try, see what happens. And when you're done following the instructions in the README, try doing something completely different than the instructions in the README just to see what happens. So I think this is a great time to experiment with quantum. It's a great time to learn. And I'm really excited to see what this next generation brings to the table.
Oh, thank you, Stefan. Shreyas, your remarks.
I can only echo everything that Stefan's basically saying. And I would say journey begins now. And you each and every single one of you listening to this are already best positioned to grab whatever opportunities that are out there, because our clients are asking about this. It's definitely quantum computing are definitely looking, and communication are definitely looking to find out where that's out there. And the ecosystem is evolving with so many different collaborators already. So, you got people from hardware, software, applications, and services, which is awesome. For those of you with a startup mindset, the landscape is thriving with nourishing investments. So you definitely are not short of that in any way, shape, or forms. People would love to hear from you and how you're going to bring that to businesses. And, folks like Microsoft and IBM would love this. Cloud technology has always been the key to kind of get this thing done. So get ahead, start experimenting with these cloud techs, just like what Stefan's saying, download these things, these SDKs, and start experimenting with them. From that perspective, you can very quickly move as this technology is moving from theory into practice. I personally believe there's going to be a shortage of available talent. But, we need you. My team needs you. I need you. Please go forth, learn, download, experiment, explore, and come talk to us. We're happy.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Nick, hand it off to you.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks for all the panelists today. This has been a wonderful experience to have this conversation with you this afternoon. I really just wanted to add on to what Suzanne said, and Shreyas touched on this as well. Is I want people to create great things, and the tools to be able to do that exist right now with providers, with open source packages, with all these kinds of tools that are very easy for you to install and start experimenting with. I think that's the right attitude to have, is see what you can create, just as Shreyas said, and then I think the other thing is a lot of people are saying, and I know you said this before, Travis, it's like, when a quantum computer is available in 5 years, when a quantum computer is available in 10 years. I think that mentality, I'm sorry, I think it needs to go away, because I think you need to do the best work you can with whatever exists at the time you're given. And I know it's going to change, and I know things are going to mess up, and things are going to get improved, and your work is no longer going to be applied. But I think that's the right attitude to get in there and become a part of the quantum workforce.
Oh, excellent point, Nick. No, I very much appreciate that.
Thanks.
Chris, hand it off to you for closing remarks.
Sure, thanks. Travis, by the way, you're very good at this. I think I've been on a few panels where you, so watch out. That's a tough job. You have to listen to everything. Sorry. So I'll just conclude quickly by noting that this field, especially on the quantum computing side, but the whole quantum information science area, it is science. And I want to say two things about that. Number one is what I love about the field is that I am continually a student, having to learn about number theory. Back, this was 25 years ago when I heard of Shor's algorithm, had to learn about the Chinese remainder theorem and get a little up to speed on that. More recently, I've had to learn about cosmology, wormholes, information entropy, and black holes. QCD, nuclear structure. I mean, these things a lot about. In chemistry, quantum chemistry algorithms. I mean, it's not atomic physics. I was trained in atomic physics, and we're building these things. But so I think the second thing I want to say about the scientific aspect of this field that's so great is that it underlies why I formed IonQ with Jungsang Kim. It wasn't that I wanted to be in business. That's not it at all. This was the only vehicle to make such high performing systems. It's very hard to do that on a campus. The NSF may have a T in it pretty soon, maybe. There's talk about increasing the NSF's exposure to the technology angle, which is great because in our field, especially in quantum, it's not, the NSTF, if that's what they're going to be called, they're going to cover lots of different technologies. But quantum is perfectly situated for that because you have to do the technology to do the science, to do the high level science that these quantum computers will make. And I'm afraid companies won't pay for that. I don't know. I shouldn't go on record on IonQ's official business plan, but we're not gonna develop systems especially for cosmology. That's just not going to pay the bills. However, to get to a place where we can deploy the best systems like we use HPC now for such calculations, science is going to have to pay the bills, I think, for a few years. I don't know how long that will be, but the science is amazing, even if companies won't necessarily pay for it. But it's going to allow us as an entire economy to reach that point where we can put these things in the kitchen.
Oh, wonderful, Chris. Thank you. Vlad, turn to you.
Well, I like sometimes kind of contradictory statements because they show that life is not that simple, and you cannot reduce things to one single statement, no matter how true it looks like. So, for example, Sasha said that we need to bring quantum to kind of new normal so that lay broad audience would stop thinking about this as something exotic. True, but still, I love the fact that there's so much mystery about quantum. I mean, Chris mentioned some of that, like cosmology, the way brain works. I think so much exciting, and I'm absolutely passionate about this mystery, unknown about quantum. And in fact, actually, the best thing about quantum that it combines the two. I mentioned also earlier that I kind of like technology-driven science, and quantum is that type of science. But in parallel, it's also so fundamental, and there is so much mystery that makes us really be passionate about this. And that reminds me a statement of one famous Soviet Union time academician, Artsemovich. He was once asked, please define what is physics. And he would say, physics is the way to satisfy our curiosity at the expense of taxpayers. And we are lucky that we actually do it so exciting, so mysterious, so in many regards unknown science. That's really great, and we are paid for this. But in the end of the day, we also do realize that this science actually will have huge impact, and it's already making this impact. And this combination of the two makes us very lucky ones. So we live in a very special time. And I think I'm grateful to the fact that I'm part of this. So it's very exciting.
Oh, wonderful, Vlad. Very nice remarks. Dana, I think this brings us to you, concluding remarks.
Well, for the quantum landscape and my own personal motivation, I think actually I could just take what Chris said and sort of repeat it, and I won't. I'm an applied physicist. I always liked doing things that were useful. I always liked tremendous learning and working on hard things that were also useful. As I grew older, I also really, really enjoyed training well-prepared students to have a professional career. Most of my students go into industry. But the main reason I started Cold Quanta was really a patriotic one. You know, we've seen over the many years, my simplified view, that the US gave away a lot of its good technology, a lot of its manufacturing skills, a lot of its technical capabilities. And I had worked at the university for years with companies to try to get them to pick up the technology that they even paid me to do. And it was very ineffective. And I began to feel very strongly, Cold Quanta was founded in 2007, that the only way one could be quantum innovative was to start a company and to ensure that that technology was, you know, cultivated here to bring back this sort of innovation spirit. And you know, the interesting thing that I can tell you, although some of you business people may know, is just now, only now in the past couple of years and moving forward, is the investment community really keen, finally, on investing in what they call, for reasons that they call it deep tech. I call it hardware. I call it making things. But now they have their own name, deep tech, and they're willing to invest in it. And so quantum has helped the world make that shift. I'm very glad to be a part of it. As I said, I think quantum will be a transistor-like, laser-like, internet-like revolution that's very hard to see to the other end. but I'm very, very glad to be a part of it. And I think that's the exciting thing for whoever's in the audience, the future workforce and so on. You're going to be a part of something and have a big impact, even if you come from making cakes or driving a truck and just come in and work. You'll see the impact of your energy.
Thank you, Dana. And let me take this moment to thank all of the panelists for sharing your time and your experience and your wisdom in this area, but most importantly, your passion, because I think that's one thing that's come through this panel, is how driven each of you are and how that's not only shaping what the quantum workforce looks like, what the S&T innovation looks like, but honestly, our dear audience benefits the most from this, from hearing from you about what it's like to really be engaged in this field. And I hope this will encourage all of them to continue their work after the Quantum Summer School and hopefully next year join us for the second Quantum Summer School. With that, thank you again. We'll conclude today's panel and then we will transition over to concluding remarks. So thank you again.
Travis, thank you. You've done a fabulous job moderating, and it's great to meet those of you that I don't know, and it's great to see some of you that I do know. And best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Indeed, thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for the panel discussion. I would just like to say, as Deputy Director of the Quantum Science Center, my thanks to all of the lecturers that joined us for the summer school, and most importantly, to all the people who helped pull the summer school together. In particular, Sasha Boltaseva. Sasha, it's been an amazing summer school, and I really congratulate you and your team on pulling that together, and especially the work that you and David Stewart and Alex Sinichev and so many other people have done. Just please know that we all appreciate that, and seeing the outcome of this is incredibly important to the Quantum Science Center. So thank you, Sasha.
Thank you, Travis, very much. And I would just like to take this opportunity to thank everyone one more time. What's important, as we already discussed, is to start investing in the new technology revolution and building quantum workforce. And I feel that with fantastic and passionate people as all of the participants of the summer school, this field is really in a safe hands and we are on the right track. Before concluding the school, I would like to share with you some of the statistics. It's definitely not final, and we will share it on the website later on. But I think it's been really impressive of how wide audience we managed to reach out with the school. Of course, all of us were disappointed that we are not doing it in person because nothing can really replace person-to-person interactions. But on the other hand, we got more than 400 registered attendees. And on and off throughout this week, the number of participating people, including the YouTube live stream, were actually over 200 people. So we actually got 325 people logging in and into the meeting on Monday. So it's really impressive, the reach of this type of event, which also reflects the fact how interested people are in quantum. And while I certainly hope that next time we will welcome all of you in person and maybe on Purdue campus, I am absolutely sure that we will be running these events in a hybrid mode to make sure that we are also reaching out to a broader audience for those who cannot come in person. One thing that I would like to mention, and this just came in the chat from David, that we even had questions and conversation with a high school student who was interested in quantum. And I think it's fantastic outcome. It means that we are reaching to a broad audience, and we have to build on that. We have to build on our social media channels and just bring more people in. We need high school students, we need teachers, we need lay audience, and communicate our excitement about this field. I would like to extend my greatest thanks, as Travis said, to the whole team. And in fact, that's not me, it's the whole team who put together this wonderful event. Purdue Quantum Science and Engineering Institute Managing Director David Stewart was leading all the organization of everything connected to school. Our leader for postdocs and graduate students at the QSC, Alex Senechev, QSC people, Erica Valentine, who was helping with all the administrative things, and everyone, all moderators, students, PIs, younger and more senior participants. It's been really great experience. We have featured speakers, not only from the Quantum Science Center, but also from other DOE centers. And in fact, our school was the very first event of that type among all DOE centers, and with many more to come. So I encourage all of you to stay informed of what's going on, not only at the QSC, but also other DOE centers, because what we would like to do is to achieve full alignment and coordination between the centers. So we will later align DOE center activities for all the centers, as well as involve NSF and other quantum centers as well. So let's consider this the very first step in a row of very interesting and far-reaching events. And I'm just looking very much forward to riding on the way of quantum. Thank you all very much, and see you next time.